Hi everyone, my name is Shani Evenstein. I'm an educator and I work at Tel Aviv University. And today I'm very delighted to host Liam Wyatt, the man who basically invented what we in the community call GLAM. So before we go to what GLAM is, let's meet Liam. Hi Liam, thanks for coming to talk to students.
There's my name. How are you?
I'm great, how are you?
Cold. Winter has arrived.
Oh, you're where in the globe? Just for people to know.
I'm Australian, but I live in Italy. So
excellent.
I've moved to Europe and to a much more convenient time zone for you.
Excellent. So why don't we begin by you presenting yourself, telling people a bit about who you are?
So I'm, as I said, Liam Wyatt. I'm known as Witty Llama on all of the Wikimedia projects and also on Twitter, which is an anagram of my real name. The claim to fame, I suppose, for what I do in Wikimedia is having originated the GLAM outreach component of our community, and specifically the Wikipedian in Residence concept. So GLAM stands for Galleries, Libraries, Archives, Museums. It's the cute acronym for the cultural sector. Every country has a different word for that idea, memory institutions or heritage institutions, but the concept is the same. These are the organizations that a culture believes are responsible or creates to be responsible for collecting, preserving, describing, and disseminating their own cultural heritage for and by that culture and for other cultures. And that's good. That's a value that we all have, and that's why every country in the world has a national museum, a national library, etc. So as the Wikipedia community, I thought, and this is about 6 years ago now, that it was important that we have a relationship with these people, with the museum sector or library sector, and vice versa, that we are basically doing the same thing for the same people, for the same reason, in a different method. So we should have more in common than we have apart. Yes, there are obvious differences in ideology or obviously in practice, but what was at the time quite controversial for both groups, for different reasons, has now become a standard practice of most, if not all, Wikimedia communities around the world in trying to have formal relationships with their national cultural institutions, and vice versa.
So how did it all start, basically?
I got really angry. That's how it started. I was working for an Australian digital project, discovering the history of Sydney, my home city. And my job was to license multimedia for this organization. It's called the Dictionary of Sydney. You can look it up. And I was already a Wikipedian, and I had written my thesis, my undergraduate thesis, about Wikipedia from a historiographical perspective. But in practice, trying to build a non-profit, non-advertising, publicly funded and public good project about the history of my own city, I was finding it extremely difficult to actually access and use the cultural heritage in my own local cultural heritage organizations. And I thought, this is ridiculous. This is material that has been collected and preserved and in theory shared for the common good, but not through malice, but more through fear, primarily. A little bit of ignorance or confusion, sometimes deliberate confusion, about copyright or about restrictions of moral issues, but primarily about a fear of what if someone does something bad, and also a concern about financial planning, financial long-term stability of the cultural institutions both at home and around the world, many institutions think of digital access as some kind of second-class citizen or something that can be monetized or should be feared, as opposed to just a different form of access. So if I go to a cultural heritage institution anywhere in the world, almost, I can request for free to see and examine a physical document that is very rare and very expensive to preserve and expensive to provide the facilities for me to access it. But with some exceptions, I can go and do that in a physical location in most places in the world. Now, and that's considered a right as a citizen or as an academic. But if I'm a digital academic, if I'm not physically in the room, then I'm supposed to fill out forms and provide waivers and pay fees and generally behave like I am either someone trying to exploit the material and sign various, I will not do this and this and this, or that I'm a commercial operation, or that I'm somehow not really interested in it because I'm not physically in the room, and therefore I should pay. Now, I found that really frustrating. And so GLAM Wiki, the cultural institutions working with Wikimedians, was born out of a sense that what Wikipedia does is what the cultural institutions should be thinking is a good idea. Providing access outside of the institution to reuse and recontextualize, and clearly in an educational and serious project, not something that they would consider to be bad. They might not like it, they might not personally like Wikipedia, but they can see that we're trying to do well and we're trying to be educational, at least. That should be considered to be a good thing. And equally, Wikipedians were concerned about usual, oh, these are the old-fashioned things and we shouldn't, that's how they used to do it, and oh, physical books aren't real anymore, ha ha ha. And that's crap. Both are quite valuable and they need to learn from each other in practice and in professionalism, and use each other's position in society.
So what did you do? What came out of this frustration practically?
Practically, the first thing was a conference in Australia, in Canberra, the capital, for those who are not familiar with Australian political geography, to bring the two groups together for the first time in the world and say, hey, we exist and we have similar motivations, similar and overlapping most of the time. What are the things that you would like us to do, and what are the things that you would like we to do for you? And have that kind of dialogue. The value of that has not been specifically in the answers to those questions, but more in the momentum that it has grown in subsequent years. There have been similar conferences in many countries in the world, including Israel. And then one of the most specific outcomes, for me at least, was the following year I went to the British Museum in London and volunteered for a short time as a Wikipedian in residence to try and demonstrate the concept that by being in-house, inside the organization, literally and metaphorically, that there are benefits to both groups that can be measured and can be achieved quite quickly. I was only there for a short time because volunteering in London is not cheap. But that has proven to be successful specifically for that project, and also for building a momentum with other institutions worldwide. And there have been many Wikipedians in residence elsewhere. Ironically now, the concept of working with cultural institutions and having Wikipedians in residence is so almost old-fashioned that it is considered not something that many national associations, at least the more mature in their organizational structure, are now saying that is something that the institutions need to drive themselves if they want to do it. We should not be involved in setting that up. We don't need to push that. That is outreach that has happened. Now they know about it, and it's their responsibility to continue. Every country is different. Every situation is different. But we've gone from being outsiders to old-fashioned relatively quickly.
So for those who don't really have a grasp of what it is, can you describe some forms of collaborations, what's happening around the world, what are some cool projects that happened, and what are the benefits for the community, basically?
The value is for three groups: for the Wikipedians, the volunteers, and for the museum professionals, the cultural sector employees, and the people involved in that organization, as well as the general public. Both for, and the general public is almost the same. The people who are looking at Wikipedia for casual information about a topic are probably similar people who will go to a museum exhibition, which is a public access to a particular side of cultural heritage that has been curated for them. And sometimes we can convert someone who was not specifically interested in a cultural heritage topic to being interested in a cultural heritage topic, because Wikipedia is so connected and so visible. Through a couple of clicks, they can search for a pop culture topic in Google, come to a Wikipedia article, read it, discover there is a reference to a painting or something, and continue through the footnotes back to the cultural heritage institution. And now that is a kind of unexpected benefit of providing access to information in a place beyond the walls, digital or physical, of the cultural institution. Only people who intend to learn about cultural heritage will go to a library or museum. But through the magic of the internet and the interconnectedness of Wikipedia and the ability to find and share things on the internet, you can stumble across material that is then connected to cultural heritage much more easily. That kind of access is the real world benefit, and I can give you specific examples, but you can imagine the real world benefit of providing access to cultural heritage beyond the cultural heritage institution. Not just talking to the same people all the time. The kinds of projects that are particularly useful for, the specific projects particularly useful for, or popular for cultural institutions, is basically to find the topic that they are best at, or they know about, or they have the information, and to encourage a local community, either through the donation of material, information, or high-resolution images, or through the inviting that local community to visit the organization for a tour or to talk to the experts, to leverage the interest to inspire that local community to learn and then share that information with their audience. It just so happens that their audience is the readers of Wikipedia, an extremely visible audience. That is exactly the same kind of outreach that a cultural heritage organization would do for any local community. Museums and libraries often give tours to local retired people associations, or to friends of the museum, membership group, or any kind of community association in the area. That's what a museum is for. They find groups and speak to them. it just so happens that this particular group of interested volunteers has its own audience, which is 10, 100, 1,000 times bigger than the museum itself. So there's a kind of double benefit. Here's a local community that is valuable itself, and they have a community of readers.
So from the top of your head, what are some, I don't know, milestone collaborations worldwide that really changed the game? That the contribution was so immense or so made such an impression that things were different after?
Oh, now this is where you could get in trouble for forgetting someone's major contribution. Of course, I'm going to forget something.
Well, we can't mention everything, just to give people some kind of idea.
Well, I think the British Museum project was very important, and there have been subsequently, for example, full-time permanent employees whose entire job is now to be the Wikipedia liaison or Wikimedia liaison, because it's not just Wikipedia. There's also Wikimedia Commons for multimedia, and much more recently, Wikidata has become the hot topic. So, for example, the National Archives of America, which is known as NARA, has a full-time permanent Wikipedian in the staff. So that's quite important in terms of seeing what it does as a worthy of investing in for the long term. I'm trying to think. The
Rijksmuseum.
Rijksmuseum. Thank you. Rijksmuseum has been particularly useful, or particularly innovative, not because they have hired a Wikipedian. I don't think they've ever had a Wikipedian in residence, for example, but because the staff as a general group simply believe in the same ideas. So they just push everything that they have under a free license, a free copyright license, that most open that they can find, which I believe the students of this course will learn about free licensing a bit more in detail later on. But they use CC0 as much as possible, which means that by providing good quality, linked and free, free in both senses of the word, gratis and lieb, no cost and no restriction, they don't need to actually do anything proactively on Wikipedia. They can if they want to, but by removing restrictions, the kinds of restrictions I was frustrated with originally back in Sydney, they allow people to be involved. They are inviting people to be involved in their content merely by saying, we're not stopping you, which is, you would think that's a pretty low bar to obtain, but most cultural institutions are afraid of people being involved because there is a sense of loss of control or loss of authority. Now, this depends in the field, and it depends on the national culture, but cultural heritage is one of authority to speak on behalf of the past and interpret that past. So the concept of the general public being able to access and reinterpret that information with much greater fluidity than in the past is scary. And the Rijksmuseum, along with some others, because of their no one is going to question the Rijksmuseum's legitimacy. This is my theory. Because they are so big and so respected, they feel confident enough to be able to let go. It is, I think, the smaller institutions or the less powerful institutions that feel they need to hold on to the power that they have much more strongly. But the Rijksmuseum is leading the way in terms of letting go, and that does not diminish their respect in or in the public or in academic respect.
And in this sense, this brings us to kind of a tension that is always there between institutions and our community. It's about creating open knowledge in a very closed environment sometimes. So
yeah,
that's always...
The nature of Wikipedia is ironic in that it is all about openness, but for both technological and cultural reasons, it's difficult to understand. It's a complicated form of writing. It is a style of writing in its own, just like writing an essay or writing journalism or writing a novel. They're all different kinds of writing, and writing for an encyclopedia is a different form of text that students need to understand how to read, proactively read a kind of text, the way you learn in high school to read a play or read the newspaper critically. But to be involved in that process requires a kind of thinking as well, to not be responsible or be solely responsible for the material. It's a kind of Zen approach to writing where you need to give what you can and hope or trust that other people will reciprocate. And
which
the
of course
outcome
is something we can educate people to do. It's part of a process of teaching people to, just the way we teach them to read Wikipedia differently than they used to read older printed encyclopedias. So they need to learn how to assess and how to, as you said, critically read it.
Yeah, and it's not that Wikipedia is unique in history of being a collaborative document. Not at all, and not even unique in the history of digital documents, obviously. But things like the King James Bible, one of the most important translations of the New Testament into English, or even the Oxford English Dictionary. So the most important dictionary in English, arguably the most important dictionary in the world, because it was the first complete attempt to make a dictionary, not just a selection of important words or foreign words. Both of those documents were made by committees, and in particularly with the Oxford English Dictionary, was made by crowdsourcing. The public was requested with a little piece of paper inside, that was put inside every book published in the English-speaking world for a couple of decades, that said, we're making a dictionary. If you see an interesting word in this book that is used, or any book that is used in a way, in a sentence that describes the meaning of the word well, that explains the word well, please send it to us by mail as an example of this word in practice. And that was collected into a big room, a giant shed out the back of a professor's office in England, in Oxford English Dictionary. And that team, that committee, then, in a more traditional sense, created with the editorial board for deciding on what words existed and what definitions they had and what examples existed. My point of explaining this story is that this is crowdsourcing, community submission of ideas for a project that has the highest academic standards and highest academic expectations now, and where the people first suggesting the idea of, one, crowdsourcing, or two, that you could collect every word in the language and an example of every type of its use, were laughed at. It was considered crazy that you could do either of those things. And the project took much longer than expected. Much longer than expected. Decades and decades longer than expected. But I believe that is the exact same principle or founding ideology that Wikipedia is based on. So more than it being unique, I'm trying to argue that it is not unique, that it is part of a long-standing tradition of asking the public to be involved in the recording and sharing of their own cultural heritage and to take responsibility for it.
Taking it a step further and considering what's happening in GLAM and academic world, there has been throughout the last 5 years some collaborations that are specifically with academic institutions that still fall under the umbrella of GLAM. So can you tell us a bit about that and talk about why it's even important for academic institutions to collaborate in such a way with us?
So the kinds of institutions that do fall or do not fall under the umbrella of GLAM?
Now I'm talking about academic institutions that fall under GLAM anyway.
Well, the word GLAM is vague. It's deliberately vague, and everyone can redefine it to their own preference. There have been lots of suggestions that the acronym should be changed to include zoos, or botanical gardens, or sports heritage, or universities, or broadcasters, public broadcasters, the BBC, for example. Does that count? Sure, of course. The idea is simply that here is an organization, for example, a university, whose job is to collect and share and describe and discuss cultural heritage. Now, the difference with universities is that they are sites of production of knowledge, not simply the description of knowledge. Now, Wikipedia tries very carefully to limit itself to merely describing and publishing and summarizing the thoughts of others and not being a site of first publication itself. And that's where academics often get frustrated working with Wikipedians, because they come and say, well, I am the expert about this thing, and therefore I say this is true. And Wikipedians say, well, show me your footnotes, prove it. I want to see a book. And so that professor says, well, here's the book that I wrote with my name on it that says the exact same thing. And Wikipedians say, okay, because Wikipedians don't care about who is saying it, merely that it can be verified. So we, as I put it, we outsource truth to other publications, whereas universities are places that expect, for the academics at least, not for the student end, but for the academic professional end, they're expected to be the place of those publications, those primary documents or secondary documents, the analysis of history or science or whatever. Academics are supposed to say, this is true and here is my publication that makes the claim. Wikipedians are supposed to say, here is our description of the topic pointing to those claims by the academics. So they're not in competition. They're actually doing two different kinds of thing, and they require each other to exist. So academics and universities, at least at the beginning, feel like Wikipedians are trying to usurp them or undermine them or replace them. And in fact, I found this with curators in museums as well as academics. The more old-fashioned the curator, the more old school the academic. Once we get past the discussion of, oh, it's the internet and it's the crowd and it's a different form of publication, they actually are much more interested in the nature of Wikipedia and trust it much more, or understand it much more, because we are the only people who come to them and ask and talk about proper footnoting. and references and verifiability. Everyone else comes to talk about about the internet and talks about how many likes did they get or how many shares did they get. Who cares? Wikipedians come to them and say, what is the source of your knowledge? And that's a much more intellectually interesting topic for the old-fashioned professors, where Wikipedians are basically old-fashioned professors on computers. We like footnotes. We like structured information. And that really is quite different from all the other forms of collaborative or collective involvement on the internet, which generally you can classify as social media. If you're involved in a kind of community on the internet of sharing information, most of the time, not always, it's social media, where the currency, and I realize I'm going a long way from the original question, but the currency of social media is sharing, is likes, is visibility in itself, is being engaged for the sake of being engaged. Wikipedians or Wikimedia, the currency is the information. The engagement is merely the method you go about to achieve it. So the fact that it is crowdsourced, the fact that it has this novel or weird form of creation is not inherent to the purpose of Wikipedia. It is just the method by which we achieve the goal of a good quality repository of information that is linked to the primary and secondary sources. If we found that was a more efficient and effective way to do that was by paying academics to write the articles, then that's what we would do. Obviously, a lot of ideology and commitment has built up around the current methodology of the wiki, but it's just a methodology. It's not the purpose. That's what really sets Wikipedia apart from other kinds of projects that it is often compared to, like Facebook.
Yes, and it's important.
And the educationalists are interested in working with and for Wikipedia and not for social media.
Right, and it's important to note on that that many educators who are very resistant or cautionary at the beginning, when they get what it is that we actually do, actually want to join in, actually change their attitude. And there is kind of a shift around the world, and we see a rise in the number of academics who actually collaborate with us, the number of students who write, who get Wikipedia assignments of sorts, and of course courses like these, where this is the main focus.
You often hear students, after a Wikipedia assignment at university level, saying in their feedback or their personal review, saying, I had no idea how difficult or how much, how unexpectedly complicated the concept was going to be to write a Wikipedia article. And not just because of the technology, but for getting my mind around the nature of the work, that it was
right.
so
Working collaboratively does take effort.
Even not even collaborative. Certainly, yes, collaboratively, but not only that. Just the idea of being asked to atomize a concept and describe this thing. Every other academic essay a student is requested to write, at least in the humanities and the social sciences, you're supposed to discuss a topic, introduce an argument, justify that argument, yes or no, or why you think it is important, and make reference to other people's claims to support or oppose their arguments, and to build an intellectual position in a topic. And Wikipedia is entirely opposed to that method of writing. So at least in English, we have the phrase familiarity breeds contempt. I think because people are so or students are so familiar with Wikipedia, they are surprised when they have to look behind the curtain at what goes into it and how different it is from everything else that they do and read. And they were not consciously aware of that.
Certainly faculty as well, not only students.
Yeah.
Okay, so taking it one step further and thinking about GLAM and academic institutions, where do you see the future, if at all? What else can we do that we haven't done yet?
In academia.
In academia and GLAM, I mean, I'm talking about specifically many universities, for example, have libraries or have botanical gardens or have, well, GLAM institutions, as being imperative parts of the institution.
Part of the organization, yeah.
Right. So where can we take it further, and what would we want to see in the coming future on that realm?
So the diversity of institutions you've just mentioned is so broad that the variety of things you can do is also broad. For the sciences, as you are familiar, there is a big move towards open access publication, and particularly for publicly funded research, to make that information publicly available, and not behind private and very expensive journals and journal aggregators like JSTOR and Elsevier, and different faculties and students from different areas will recognize this from different angles. But Wikipedia has projects to encourage open access publication of new science, and also on the flip side to encourage to provide access to Wikipedians for material which is normally closed access. And this is a topic that is ideologically controversial because it is, in a form, providing a publicity through footnotes on Wikipedia articles to closed access materials. But on the other hand, it's perfectly legitimate. If that is the best source for that information, who am I to say that I shouldn't use it because someone else owns it? So there's ideology and pragmatism. So science is an area that is going to become increasingly involved ideologically with Wikipedia in terms of open access mission. Then I think Wikidata, or structured information in general, is going to be a big thing, not just for science, but equally for the humanities, in that...
Just before you continue, can you tell people what Wikidata is? Because some might not know.
So there is Wikipedia, which you're familiar with as the encyclopedia. There's Wikimedia Commons, which you might be familiar with, which is a repository of multimedia images and video and so forth. And there's a series of other sister websites that have other forms of information. A dictionary, a collection of primary source documents and old books scanned, and so forth. And the latest one is arguably the most important, which is all about data itself. Now, it makes it much harder to use as a human, but it's not really for you as a human to use. It's for other projects to take that information because it is structured and build upon it. So the example that I'm going to refer to specifically is art. In fine art, there is a concept of catalogue raisonné, meaning this is the complete list of every paintings made by this painter. The year, who owns them now, why are they significant, what was the material, what is their provenance, who owned them in what order, for example. And so making a catalogue raisonné of a well-known painter, for example, is a really big deal. And these are quite important publications. And usually they're books, and they're big fat books. Wikidata, by structuring this information, here is a painting, it has an author. That author or painter has made 20 paintings, and they are in these institutions, and these institutions have these other paintings. Means, and if all that information is connected together in a way that can be queried with a structured phrase by a computer or by a human, you can produce information that was otherwise hidden. You can map where are all the paintings right now that were made by this person, where, what is the average color of every painting by this person on that, in that year, or to take it away from art, the question that founded Wikidata, that the people who built it wanted answered: who is the female mayor of the largest city in the world currently? So that information exists, and it's in Wikipedia, but you'd have to read every single Wikipedia article about a city and then go and click on the link for its mayor. Now you can simply ask the database, show me a list of cities by population, show me, and then give me their mayor's name, and filter out all of the mayors that have the property male. And then you have a list in rank order of names of women who are mayors of cities. Now, why you might want to know that is a bit random, but the point is, this is information that existed already. It was never structured in a way that could be useful. Pretty much any organization can use that data. It's like census data for an urban planner. Extraordinarily valuable, but every other kind of database that exists is atomized to its topic only. Wikidata, I think, is the first example of that for all topics that can be interconnected and made available free under the definition I described before. Academics can use that and can contribute to that from every single possible faculty for their own research, to take information from it, but also to produce information in a structured way to it, because it's all available to be used and reused.
Right, and it's important to know that it does that in a multitude of languages, right, across languages as well, which is important.
Yeah, so Wikipedia is by definition in a language, and so there are 280 or 300 independent Wikipedias. Data is agnostic. So the property, the item for Israel has a number. It's like a barcode, or it's a completely arbitrary number, and you can associate any number of human concepts to it, of words to it in different languages. But all of those words are just ways for you as a human to read it. In fact, all of the things you are associating to it, the concept of country or a date or a person, are just other numbers that you're connecting to each other. So anyone can access the same data in the universal language of data, not human text. It sounds very abstract, but I'm sure, Shani, you can provide some examples of it.
Yeah, we will talk about that a bit later in the course, and I think that's a good Wikidata. It's a good way to mention that part of the work that happens in GLAM is all about the metadata of things, which we haven't really talked about today. And one of the interesting things, just to mention, and I think part of basically what you do on your daily job, is to consider metadata in a global sense. And what we mean, of course, by metadata, for those who don't know the term, is all the information about a piece or made to be a picture, a statue, whatever, it doesn't matter. It has all the information of who created it, when, etc. And these institutions usually catalog the items in various different methods. And I think one of the things that is a byproduct of our work, well, not only of our work, but I think it's my thesis, sorta, that we contributed as a community to a wider discussion around the world in terms of how we catalog things and how projects like European, and maybe you can say something about this, that takes items from various institutions and need to put it in one database to talk in one language, which again relates completely to Wikidata and what we're trying to do there. So just to close our small discussion, I think this is something if you could address that.
Yeah. So as you mentioned, I work for Europeana as their wiki guy, and Europeana's job is to connect the metadata of European GLAMs. So it's quite meta, or a level up from a GLAM institution, in the sense that Europeana does not own any actual art. Its job is to try and make the information accessible across institutions. And to do that requires an extraordinary degree of flexibility of data standards, but trying to coordinate different individual institutions or organizations to speak the same language about their material. Anyone who's tried to use a physical library catalog, now this will be obscure to most people these days, I suppose, but has the problem of, do I look up the first name and then the last name, or last name, comma, first name? Or is it going to be how is this information structured, and what is the decision that has been made by this particular institution? What language, what terms am I using? Has been trying to help standardize the way that information about art is discussed or is categorized across Europe, which means that you can ask it, show me everything by Mozart in Europe, and you should get a pretty good response, not having to go to individual institutions physically or digitally to ask differently phrased questions of differently constructed search systems, physical or digital. What most people don't realize about the internet is that Google only searches a very small percentage of information. It's not simply a matter of typing in Mozart into Google and then that's everything. Most information exists below a next level of search in a library catalog or in a museum database, for example. And to make that information findable is a huge deal. Now, I'm just one end of that in terms of connecting it to Wikipedia, but the movement across all of academia, but particularly in science and particularly in art, towards linked, what's called LOD-LAM, linked open data libraries and museums. What does LAM stand for again? I forget. Linked open data. This information is connected, it's available for anyone to use, and it's in a way that everyone is consistent. That's a massive change from separate silos of information. It means we can all speak the same language.
Certainly. So I think on that optimistic note of working towards connecting everything, and of course everybody talks about the Internet of Things now, which is, I think, another aspect of exactly what it is that we're talking about. We still have a lot of work to be done, and that's the reality. So I want to thank you for taking the time to talk to me and my students. Pleasure as always. Hope you all enjoyed it, and join us for the next meeting, which is going to be with, it's going to continue our talk, and it's going to be with Jake Orlowitz from the Wikipedia Library Project.
Which I alluded to briefly in that discussion of open access publishing.
Indeed. So thanks so much. And
thank you for having me.
Bye-bye.